it explains so much, and we've kind of given away the hint, but still, everybody should watch this video. Look at it.
Right.
We're not going to tell you what it is.
Yeah.
Look at it and try to figure out what it is you're looking at, and then there's a reveal at the end. By the way, that's Jackie Kennedy with little John John. Okay, so just pause it for a second. Yeah, there you go. Pause for 1 second. So everybody should try to guess, what was that? All right, and here's the reveal.
This moment of national independence for the people of Algeria, the creation of a great new state, represents the devoted and courageous work of the Algerian people and their leaders, stretching over many years. I congratulate them. I congratulate them as President of the United States, and I congratulate them on behalf of the American people. We too fought for our own independence also, and it cost us many years of bloodshed and tears and work and perseverance. But we finally obtained our independence as you have yours, and we have maintained it as you will yours. It's a particular source of satisfaction to me to express these words of greeting to our friends in Algeria, because I recall speaking some years ago in the Senate of the United States on behalf of independence for Algeria.
So folks, what you saw, I mean, I want to ask this question. Has anybody ever seen such a lavish reception for anybody at the White House ever?
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
Okay. So what was that, folks? That was October 15th, 1962. That was Ahmed Ben Bella. That was the newly elected president of independent Algeria, the first Algerian to be the head of Algeria since the French invaded it in 1830. Okay, so they invaded in 1830, and I want to repeat, they killed 1/3 of all of Algeria in their first wave of invasion. Now, young John F. Kennedy, when he was a senator from Massachusetts, made this, there was a second war of independence that took place from between 54 and 62, in which 400,000 to 1.5 million Algerians were killed, civilians. And they did the typical stuff, bombing villages, burning villages, rounding people up, putting them in the equivalent of concentration camps, destroying their agricultural resources. And it was a drain the swamp military operation. The idea of, hey, we got all these freedom fighters in Algeria that are causing this trouble. Why don't we just destroy the entire civil infrastructure so they can never trouble us again? And by the way, Israel participated in that. They provided intelligence assets, because they knew a lot about the Middle East. They also trained French Jewish fighters and armed them and so on. So Israel was involved in that battle. So young John F. Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, gave a long speech to the Senate saying, this is wrong. We think France should stop. We don't think the United States should support this. This helps nobody. Okay. So I have to say something about Noam Chomsky. And I know this is going to seem like I love him. There'd be no me without him. I mean, he was the guy that was explaining all this stuff in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, before the rest of us figured it out. But I feel he made one terrible error, which was to lump JFK with the rest of the elites. And yeah, on a certain level, that's true. But there's two things different about JFK. He was the only guy in the White House, possibly in history, including Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, who had no financial stake in any direction the United States went in. Okay. George Washington owned a lot of land. Abraham Lincoln was actually an attorney for the railroad companies. That's how he made his money. Nobody ever asked how Abraham Lincoln has made his money, right? Kennedy was the only guy whose father was one of the richest men in the world. And, Joseph Kennedy was he had a vast Democratic Party network. He was the fifth richest man in the United States. He also knew all about myth making in Hollywood because he's one of the most important financiers in Hollywood. He put John F. Kennedy in position. We would not have seen the Kennedy brothers had it not been for Joseph Kennedy. Not that they weren't talented and ambitious. He paved the way. Okay. And those two men were absolutely independent. They looked at the world through the lens of what is right. What is right for America first, which is what they should do because they're Americans.
My gear is all fucked up.
What is right for the entire world. And Kennedy came to the conclusion was all this coup making and assassination and imperialism and putting our heels on the necks of the poor is wrong. And he had this opinion as a young man. There was no political gain for him as a senator from Massachusetts to give a long talk. In fact, it hurt him, right? Because France was our ally, it was the Cold War and everything. He didn't care. He saw what was right and he spoke up for it. So when de Gaulle finally said, we're out, Algeria had a chance to elect a president, and look at what Kennedy did. That is the greatest honor. It was the color guard, and not just 3 guys with a flag, 20 guys from each of the armed forces, all so the generals saluting and everything. And that was a message to the world, but it was also a message to the U.S. military. Because Kennedy was a military man and he was very astute. And when you're president, you have to let the troops know what the direction is. So in addition to honoring this man, honoring Algeria, telegraphing to the world that we're out of the coup business, we're out of this. He was also telegraphing to the military, we're not fighting Arab-speaking people. And by the way, I've got to say Arab-speaking. When people say Arab, it's ridiculous. It's like saying African. Like these countries are different. They're different.
Arabic speaking, right? Arabic speaking. Excuse me, Arabic speaking people. We are not their enemies. We don't want to be their enemies. We want to be their friends, and we want to be the friend of the impulse to liberty all over the world. We're going to compete, and he said this in various speeches. We're going to compete, and we're going to compete hard, but we're going to compete fair. And Chomsky would say, well, he's a Cold Warrior, and it's true. He was a Cold Warrior, but his way of fighting the Cold War was to let's be better than the Soviets. Let's show a better way. Let's show the best of us. So I'm afraid a lot of the left has written off Kennedy as an unimportant person. But when you see this, and this is just a narrow slice of what he did the same thing in Indochina. Or not unimportant, I wouldn't say unimportant, but not a departure from regular presidential foreign policy.
Gotcha.
Right.
But in
Right?
fact,
Because they would say he's important, they just basically don't want to get.
Yo,
they would
what's
say he
up?
doesn't deserve credit
First
for
time
it.
chatter, welcome to the
well, I heard
stream.
Chomsky say, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. He's not particularly interested in who killed Kennedy or why, because he's just one of the bunch. But it's not quite accurate. Again, we've just seen this demonstration of Kennedy putting his money where his mouth is, and again, no personal gain for him. There's no Algerian lobbying group that would funnel money to his campaign. He did this to do the right thing, all right? And a year later, he was dead, okay? So during the summer of 1963, he and his brother, who's the Attorney General, were fighting Israel on 2
Thank
fronts.
you.
One, Kennedy, personally, JFK personally, he wrote the letters.
People are either pleased to see it or none too happy, but yeah. Just started flying it because I just realized one day that, Palestinians can't even fly a white flag without the threat of death, let alone their own colors, so that and doing my daily streams on YouTube where I kind of amplify voices like the Electronic Intifada if they need amplification, really, but just trying to spread the message. But yeah, I was just listening to music earlier, but switched over to history of Zionism, and I'm still in that rabbit hole. Now I'm on to RFK. It's a bold move. Appreciate you. Thank you. I'm from Indiana, mainland USA. Should take a defender with me.
Or they were signed with his name. He wrote the letters, the telegrams, the cables, and we have all the correspondence, which was classified until just a few years ago, which is really weird. He was telling the Israelis, you cannot have a nuclear weapon. Period. End of story. We need to see your labs. We need to see what you're doing. Now, on the brother side, Robert Kennedy, who's Attorney General, was telling the Israeli lobbyist groups, you got to register, just like everybody else. England registers, Canada registers, Australia registers. You've got to register too. And of course, they were using the endless delay tactics. So there was a secret war, and I call it secret. I call it a battle. It was secret because nobody knew about it at the time, and nobody knew about it as recently as the dawn of the 21st century. Right? So it was secret. I'm calling it a battle because it wasn't an all-out war, but it was a battle. It was serious, and each side had a position, and each side was digging in deep. And who was he fighting against? He was fighting against, in my opinion, extremist elements in Israel. Which, by the way, I don't know how many people know this. Did you know that Hannah Arendt, and am I pronouncing that right? Sometimes I read things that I don't know how to pronounce. The great sociologist Arendt, he spoke against fascism. She and Einstein wrote a letter to the New York Times in the 1940s saying, hey, these Zionist extremists are terrible. We shouldn't.
They even said fascist.
Yeah, we should not invite them into our.
What about you? Where are you from?
Now that's something I would bang that drum every day of the week.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to say. Can you update me on the current situation in the news? It's just been pretty bleak worldwide. There have been some Oh, you're from Cali. Oh, right on. Nice. Well, you can tune into my daily streams where on YouTube where I kind of do like resource gathering where I collect headlines from the Electronic Intifada, a Democracy Now, Drop Site News, focusing on the Middle East and also kind of ICE in the U.S. It's kind of monitoring fascist movements on weekdays, and I'll do my daily stream. You can catch that on Twitch here or on YouTube. And but if you're familiar with the Israeli operation Gideon's Chariot, or Gideon's Chariots plural, has been pretty much slowed to nothing by the resistance, and that's why Israel wants to launch this whole siege into Gaza. Well, not a siege, a whole invasion. And they've become so desperate, Israel has, that they've been loading up these trucks with ordnances and then driving them with drones and remote detonating them as a method of demolition. Because every time they send soldiers into Rafah or anywhere near Khan Yunis, the resistance meets them. That's so harsh. Humans are so cruel. And what's sad is, like, I was watching this documentary in Tantura, like, I feel so heartbroken seeing those kids starving to death. And it baffles me, the people I know who have kids who say that they just don't care about the Palestinians. I mean, like, how can you not? Sometimes the most direct information that you can get is literally from Palestinian journalists on Twitter. I think that's why you see so many independent news people with like 1,000 tabs from like Twitter or X up, because it's kind of been the front lines for news for a long time. There's a video, and Hamas is designated by the American State Department as a terrorist organization. So we can't praise them. You gotta call them, you gotta use words like the resistance. Yeah, like on the news channels, like, you know, the ones I'm pointing, they're sharing misleading info. Or refusing to call it a genocide outright. Or like when Reuters, I think it was Reuters, oh, and AP as well, spread lies about, oh, a superior foe has emerged, oh shit. Anas al-Sharif, smearing him as a Hamas person. It's ridiculous. I've never fought this guy before, I don't know what I'm doing. Fuck, he's hitting me so hard. Shit. He must have a melee attack as well. I don't know if I got this. Bro, I'm sweating. Alright. I think I got him. Yeah, he's toast. Alright. Whoa. You got any video recommendations? Oh, there's a place that I want to show you called Socotra. Have you ever heard of that? So Yemen is being Yemen and Israel are trading land-to-land missile strikes right now. They're literally bombarding each other's mainlands. That's news, I guess. Nope, no recommendations. That's fine. I think it was the Gray Zone, the Anti-Empire Project. Is it? No. Yeah, so Yemen launched missiles into Israel, which was probably swept under the rug in mainstream media. You're not allowed to film Israel getting attacked anymore. And then you can look up the huge fireball that happened after Yemen was struck. Yemen, Israel news. Let's look at that. Video captures aftermath of Israeli airstrike against Houthi targets in Sana'a, Yemen. Israel strikes Yemen after Houthi attack. Sorry, it's loud as fuck. That fireball's crazy. They stand by their brothers and sisters in Palestine. I mean, what can I say? A lot of this stream has been like history of Zionism and drawing parallels between now and the Holocaust. And they don't stop. Like, the parallels just don't stop.
Never again, after the Nazi genocide. But did they mean that to apply only when the victims are white? I'm Tony Karen, I'm the editorial lead at AJ Plus, and as a Jewish person, I was raised with these images of genocide seared into my brain from a very, very young age. It was grotesque images of Jewish bodies deliberately starved and brutalized by the Nazis that horrified the Western world to the point...
I was just telling the last person I was here that, you know, it changed my life when I learned about the Holocaust, as, like, I'm sure it would anyone. And I saw my high school history teacher in the grocery store the other day, and I thought about asking her what she thought about what was happening in Palestine, but I don't know. it was a big blind spot in our curriculum, the history of Israel. So I'm learning a lot.
Of prompting
I didn't say anything to her. I just kind of let her pass by, but I'm sure she's just as flabbergasted and mortified by what we're seeing every day.
the resolve that genocide, the crime of crimes, could never be allowed to be repeated. And yet, here we are, seeing the images that echoed that same horror.
IDK man, it feels scary to ask people just because you might end up getting sad about the brutal humanity. Well, it's also how you find allies. And my own brother says that he doesn't care about the lives of the Palestinians. I mean, like, he's got kids and stuff, so I understand, but I don't at the same time. Like, this is the moral issue of our time, and there's not a whole lot I can do except distance myself from the people who, like, it's the same argument as why you would want Nazis to have free speech. Like, I want to know who the cold-hearted people are around me so that I can avoid them, you know? Like, I want the Nazis to be able to protest so that they'll be out in the daylight, you know? And I want to know every single politician. I want to know every single public figure. I want to know all about their history with Zionism, because this is going to be how humanity moves forward, is shedding this parasite of Zionism, because it's been plaguing humanity for so long. We learned even before the Nazis, you know, like, you are either the oppressor or the one getting oppressed. There's nothing in between. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's the essence of class war. I know someone, they're like, I'm neutral. I was like, dude, there's nothing neutral in this situation. Yeah. Dude, this is why I can't listen to Radiohead anymore, because of what Tom York said. Did you see that statement he put out? Yeah, there are so many public figures like Dua Lipa supporting Palestinians, and it doesn't take much. You know what I mean? Like, you're a public figure not because you're a genius on global politics, you know. You have a beloved fan base because they think highly of you. So what better way to make people think less of you than not giving a fuck about a genocide, you know? Someone was like, I'm still gonna listen to Radiohead. How? When they're willing to perform in Tel Aviv and collaborate with Israeli artists. they're not the soft, empathetic people that they make themselves out to be. Just like how R. Kelly isn't a, you know, a womanizer. He's actually a coercive pedophile. What Tom York said, I mean, just hold up a flag for 2 seconds at a concert, you know what I mean? It really doesn't... Or just say Free Palestine once. Some guy shouting at me from the dark last year when I was picking up a guitar to sing. Yes, I saw that reel. Okay. It's so wild.
Documenting the same physical effects of deliberate starvation and brutalization, this time on the bodies of Palestinian children, and this time with the perpetrators being Jewish. Now, how is this monstrous inversion even?
Imagery like this will completely demolish anyone who is like anti-Nazi but pro-Zionist, you know? How can you not see the parallels? Are you active on any socials like IG or Discord? Yeah, yeah, I have a Discord. I think that's what it is. Let me double check. I was thinking of making a Discord for my channel, but I don't know. I'll just keep my personal one. Discord was almost called Wyvern before we picked our name. I was doing Slayer. Might have a Wyvern task. What's up, Julie? Yeah. Gotcha.
In a world that has for decades insisted that this could never be allowed to happen again. Let's be clear.
Hell yeah.
It's happening only because it is being allowed to happen. It's being allowed by the impunity that Israel is guaranteed.
And thank you for the follow, by the way. What do I do besides streaming? I like making music, playing with my corgi, bike rides, although I haven't taken the bike out this summer. I really should. Thank you. I like music. I got sober from alcohol 2 years ago, so I've been kind of rediscovering all my hobbies and stuff. What kind of music? All kinds. I like metal, hip-hop, alternative. We had a whole a DJ sesh earlier. And having a great time streaming and stuff. Call you my fellow artist. I do like making art. I've been making some stickers. Here's one. These are all a bunch of like just red stickers that I stole from my Amazon job when I worked there. It's like a bunch of blank red stickers. Hell yeah. Steal from your employer. Always. Rob your employer. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't commit crimes. But yeah, my therapist is like an art therapist and stuff, and she's great. There's like a weekly class that she does that I haven't gone to in a while. Should check in with her. But yeah, any video recs or music recommendations, I'll be happy to give them a listen on stream. Although I am streaming on YouTube as well, and copyright might pull the stream down. I have something related to your Twitch streams in my mind. What is that? I hope that my Twitch streams are like pondering a crystal orb. Oh no, man, I have a very average kind of taste in music. That's fine. And it can just be yours. And it can just be yours. That's fine. I'm gonna die if I don't bank. You play RuneScape, though? You click because of the Palestinian flag, but... only if you're comfortable, maybe we can work together and make something Palestine themed for your Twitch. Oh, man. No thanks, I'm good.
Perhaps that impunity is maybe a horrifically twisted extension of the sensitivity to anti-Semitism prompted by the images of the Nazi Holocaust when they first appeared, because Israel has shamelessly and cynically over the decades claimed the Nazi Holocaust as license for decades of settler colonial violence against the Palestinians it displaced and subjugated in order to create the State of Israel. In recent years, its advocates have even codified as anti-Semitic any statement that actually compares Israeli actions and policies with Nazi behaviors. Their problem is that Israel's actions invite that comparison. The images produced by those actions, which the world now sees in real time, make such comparisons unmistakable, whether or not the words are spoken. Nazi violence against Jews required that Jews be dehumanized in the minds of Germans. They used the term Untermenschen, inferior races. The Germans were the Übermenschen, the Herrenvolk as they called it, the master race, and the Untermenschen, the inferior races, were not worthy of being treated as human beings. So the never again guardrail against genocide really begins with the sensitivity to and fierce rejection of any dehumanization of any group of people. The problem for Israel is that the settler colonial project, the violent displacement and subordination of an entire people, which is what was necessary to create Israel, depends on dehumanization. As we've seen throughout the Gaza genocide, Israeli leaders are constantly comparing Palestinians to animals, to talk about human animals, talk about beasts. The consequences of such dehumanization was the focus of the film Zone of Interest, which won the Oscar a couple of years ago. This is a film about depicting the indifference of a German household living next door to Auschwitz. And the filmmaker, Jonathan Glazer, who is Jewish, in his acceptance speech at the Oscar caused a stir because he said, this film is not about the past. This is not to say, look what they did then. It's rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. Glazer was hardly alone in making that connection. You can find dozens of examples over the years. The Israeli philosopher Yashar Leibovitz in the late 1980s causes a stir by coining this phrase Judeo-Nazi, saying that there's a Judeo-Nazi spirit driving the settler colonial occupation that would infect and doom all of Israeli society. Major General Yair Golan warns in 2016 that he's seeing in Israeli society the nurturing of an extremist behavior and attitude that basically is what in Germany had led to the Nazi Holocaust.
פוגרומים. הם הולכים לעשות פוגרום באנשים חפים מפשע.
Knesset member Ofer Kassif more recently likens Israel's plans for the Palestinians of Gaza to those of the Nazi regime to expel Germany's Jews in the 1930s. And then very recently, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert describes this plan for a humanitarian city that the Israelis are planning in Gaza to a concentration camp. These supposedly anti-Semitic connections between Israel's actions and Nazi actions have long been made by many, Jewish public figures elsewhere in the world, and now with increasing frequency given what's happening in Gaza.
The reason that I think it's important to use the word ghetto is because it gives us language for what is happening now, which is that the ghetto is being liquidated.
You can't be more evil than what they're doing.
We've seen many Jewish Holocaust survivors warning over the years that they're seeing echoes of the same dehumanization and genocide that they survived in Europe.
I'm protesting against the misuse and weaponizing of the memory of the Holocaust as a cover for the current genocide by the Israeli government.
When I found out about the Holocaust, and I thought, how could the world have let this happen? Well, I don't wonder anymore.
So how do we make sense of the catastrophic moral failure of those who have for so long professed never again to halt a genocide that's actually within their power to stop? Talking about the Western powers here, they're not only failing to stop it, but they're actively enabling that genocide by arming the perpetrators and providing the impunity that they need. Could it be that these powers, in their actions and in their discourse, tacitly accept the dehumanization of the Palestinians, in the same way as those powers had for centuries themselves dehumanized the peoples that they had colonized? It was in 1950 when the grotesque images of the Nazi Holocaust first emerged to horrify Europeans that the anti-colonial writer Aimé Césaire called it a boomerang effect. He said the genocidal violence that Western powers had waged for centuries in the colonies had now come back to smash Europe. And he says, before they were its victims, they were its accomplices. They tolerated Nazism before it was inflicted on them. They absolved it, they shut their eyes to it, they legitimized it, because until then, it had been applied only to non-European peoples. So, the images out of Gaza don't lie. Like the images from the Warsaw Ghetto, they really leave no doubt as to what's transpiring there. So, today Gaza should make us ask, how far has the West really progressed in refuting the deep-seated racism that allowed it for centuries to dehumanize, brutalize, and massacre people it colonized? Is there any explanation for Western acceptance and enabling of the Gaza genocide other than racism?
Oh! Get the fuck out of here.
على جانب البيت.
على جانب البيت.
وهاي عندنا بهلا بيتين كبار هون.
هم بيتين، واحد لأحمد وواحد لأبوي.
وهون البحر.
وهون البحر. أكيد هذا
ايش بالضبط؟
هذا البيت.
هذا بيتك؟
أكيد.
هذا بيتك؟
إيه. أقعد أنا وأبوي على البحر لما يكون رمضان، ونقعد نشوف البحر لما الشمس تغيب.
The Palestinian fishing village of Tantura, with around 1,500 inhabitants, was one of the last remaining Arab communities along the coast when the State of Israel was established on the 15th of May, 1948. By the 23rd of May, Tantura was occupied and depopulated by Israeli forces.
احنا نايمين ما سمعنا ضرب رصاص بلش طق 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 رصاص.
Witnesses spoke of fierce Palestinian resistance and systematic Israeli massacres after the occupation of the village. By analyzing ground-level photographs, memory sketches drawn by refugees, village surveys, and aerial images, and by listening to the testimonies of Palestinian witnesses, we located sites of mass graves previously unidentified. Using an immersive 3D model of the village, we further undertook situated testimony with Adnan Yahya, a survivor of the massacre.
اليوم الاحتلال، خلينا نحكي اليوم الاحتلال.
بشمال، هذا بشمال البلد وفي شرق البلد، واجوا اليهود بالبحر كمان. فالمقاومين ما عندهم سلاح كويس كان، طيب اطلقوا قتلوا حوالي 20-25 واحد.
British mandate aerial images from 1946 and 1947 show Tantura before its invasion and the subsequent ethnic cleansing as a living village. Vegetation is tended and roads regularly used. Israeli aerial images from 1949 show concentrated destruction in 3 prominent areas. In the north of the village near the main cemetery, along by the beach, and in the southern part of the village. These scars correspond to military maps and testimonies regarding the directions of the Israeli invasion. Aerial images from 1952 further document the village being gradually hollowed out following its forced depopulation, and the Jewish settlements of Nashurim and Dor being built on its lands. By 1956, the village was almost fully demolished.
عفوا قبل ما نروح لهناك حطونا على شط البحر، جمعونا رجال على شط البحر بالشمس، جمعونا كمية كبيرة وقعدنا بالشمس، لا أكل ولا شرب ولا مي ولا شيء أبدا، ولا شيء. بعدين أخذوا كلياتنا على المقبرة.
The systematic gathering and separation of men and women and children is often the first step of mass executions. Multiple archival images show Israeli forces separating villagers in Tantura.
صفوف كصفوف المصلين الرجال، واخذ النساء حطوهن في مكان ثاني.
Women and children were gathered by Israeli forces and placed on trucks and forced out of the village. Many were displaced to the nearby village of Fridis, later pushed out of Palestine and rendered refugees. According to the testimonies of survivors, a series of executions of disarmed fighters and civilians were conducted by Israeli forces. Accounts of the numbers of those murdered vary greatly between 20 and 280, mainly men, with testimonies suggesting that women were also amongst the victims.
ياخذوا زينة الشباب وحطوها على الحيط ورشوها. وهاي شوف أعيان، نعم، شاهد أعيان، نعم.
ياخذوهم على مسافة 20 متر هيك بالدخلات تبع الحارة، يرشوا على الحيط يرشوهم. باثناء ساعة زمان، ساعتين زمان، قتلوا بيطلع 60 70 شاب.
وقتها يعني حملونا، نقلونا من البحر إلى منطقة قرب المقبرة. عرفت كيف؟ في هناك صبر.
منه لكبلة ولا مغرب، هذا كلها سكبور. هاي من حد ولا كبلة لحد النخلات، هذا مقبرة. للشجرات ولا شمال بكن 3 شجرات، منها ولا شمال حوالي 30 متر هناك، يعني أقل أكثر ما بقى.
The aerial image from 1949 shows a large human-made rectangular mound that didn't exist in previous images. Using shadow analysis, we modeled this earthwork. It is 33 meters long, 3 meters wide, and approximately 1 meter high. Depending on how the bodies were buried, the size of the grave could contain between 60 and 160 bodies. North of the mound is a shallow rectangular patch with a very minor depth. This patch has semi-regular edges and a lighter earth color than its surroundings. This lighter color could be attributed to a scar of the bulldozer scraping the surface north of the mound, potentially to pile more earth over the original grave. We also observed a short road that leads to a small building with a domed roof, likely added by the Israeli army. This earth mound is visible in the aerial image from 1952. By 1956, it was overgrown by vegetation, and by 1957, the mound was flattened. The only trace is the scar of the bulldozer scraping the ground. It is possible that some human remains are spread across the area leveled for a parking lot.
والله كانوا يقولوا شي 60 70 واحد بين ولد وبين بنت وبين زلمة يدفنوا كل مع بعض يدفنوا بجورة واحدة. الجورة هاي بيقولوا لها بستان السوقي.
A memory sketch of the village, drawn by Tantura survivor Ahmad Taha Salam, identifies the properties of different families prior to the occupation of the village. We geolocated the family properties in the 1947 aerial image using key markers such as main roads, the village square, and the mosque. Of these, Plot 6 contains an orchard and the largest field owned by the Dusuqi family in 1948. When overlaying the 1947 aerial image with the 1949 image, a human-made earth mound is visible in this field. Importantly, the second mound is similar in form and dimensions to the one we saw near the cemetery. Both are long and thin earth features of a similar width and height, oriented along a similar east-west axis, and are parallel to a line of high vegetation in an otherwise open field. It is our assessment that this is very likely a second mass grave with a dimension that could contain between 40 to 80 bodies.
حفروا هالجورة صاروا زي السردين على سكينه على جنبه يصفطوا بيهم. حطوا أول صف وثاني صف ضلوا 3 نسوان برا. في 3 نسوان حفروا لهم كمان جورة الثانية 3 ودفنوهم. وين دفنوهم؟ دفنوهم في بستان الدسوقي.
Traces of this mass grave are visible in the 1952 aerial image. The location of this mass grave was previously unidentified. Multiple testimonies refer to executions and burial behind Ahmed Haj Yahya's house by the beach. In an interview, Tantura survivor Mustafa al-Masri pointed to the southern part of a 2-meter wall behind the home of Haj Yahya.
كل الزنبقة كلها تحطوها مع الشباب وبعدين بقى اللي بدهم اياه كانوا ياخذوا يكتفوا وياخذوا بعد 5 دقائق تسمع حدث الله بلا.
Fuad Hassadiya, resident of Fridis, recounted finding human bones in the same area.
تحتاي هون فوق اذا انا توكي دي ابو دار رايت 4 עצמות מה למה לי עצמות אני שואל אותו מה זה העצמות האלה מה זה העצמות האלה כאילו נכנסתי לישון.
A large ground disturbance is visible approximately 25 meters south of the site. We believe this is possibly the site of a mass grave testified to by survivors.
داخل في المقبرة في داخل بين القبور يعني ما اهتموا ايش اي محل انما كان داخل المقبرة بين القبور العادية. تشوفي الحفرة؟
يعني زي هذا التولة
المقبرة ولا الحفرة؟
ولا
الحفرة.
الحفرة؟
الحفرة مترين، متر ونص، مترين تقريبا، أكثر من 3 أمتار على كان عشان تاخذ التجربة ممكن من الناس. ايه
مترين ونص.
وكنا واقفين احنا على الطرف، على الجنب. هاي صعب اتذكرها هذا بس
Like Adnan, multiple other witness testimonies also speak of the existence of further mass graves inside the cemetery.
يمسكوا يعبوا قتلة ويجيبوا ويديروا هيك على التربة والله وعيني تتفرج. اي والله ايه بنص التربة هيك.
In the aerial image from 1949, we observed ground disturbances corresponding to the location and dimensions of the mass grave described in these testimonies. It is possible that one or more of these scars are remnants of those graves.
صديقي اللي بمدرستي
نعم
كنت انا وياه سوا بمدرسة عبد الله اسمه، كنت نحمل هذا ونرميهم. فالشيء اللي ما بنساه في حياتي، حملنا واحد من ايديه واجريه، هو حبل اجريه ولا حبل ايديه، طلع فيه بيقول لي عدنان هذا ابوه. That's my father. And he is still living. What shall I do? قلت له through him. رميناه وهو طيب ميت بعده مجروح. هذا شيء ما بنساه في حياتي أبدا. I don't forget that at all.
Over the past 75 years, the stones from Tantura have been used in the construction and landscaping of the 2 Jewish settlements and tourist resorts ruins. Only 3 original buildings from the village of Tantura remain, along the traces of original roads and trees. The mass grave by the cemetery is today a parking lot serving the tourist resort. The mass grave by the Dasuq field is the beginning of a pedestrian promenade leading out of the parking lot. The sites of the graves testified to by witnesses are located within the holiday camps. The mass graves in Tantura have since been desecrated, but the testimony of the land stands alongside the memory of its survivors.
هلا انا شايف نفسي شو عم بساوي. يعني كيف؟ مع انه it is like a dream, a very bad dream.
Forensic architecture. Comments are just people mortified.
meant actually civil war.
Civil war, in which I predict in the book, and I think many people would agree with me, the liberal secular forces of Israel will lose. They will lose to the more messianic, to the more extreme, the more right-wing groups in Israel. They are the majority in electoral terms.
This was Professor Ilan Pape. He's a historian, a truth teller, and one of the most courageous voices to emerge from within Israeli academia. The timing of this interview was no coincidence. We recorded it on June 8th, that's the 59th anniversary of the USS Liberty attack, a defining episode of suppressed history in US-Israeli relations. But that date intersected with another poignant milestone. Just 2 weeks earlier, on May 23rd, I believe it was, we had the 78th anniversary of the Tantura massacre, which is a forgotten chapter in the Nakba and the central focus of our conversation. For Professor Pape, Tantura is not just a subject of academic inquiry, it's a personal and professional crucible. His decision to expose the truth behind what happened cost him dearly. It virtually reshaped his career, it exiled him from his homeland, and forever tailored his scholarship to the struggle for historical reckoning. That's why I had long looked forward to this very conversation. It adds crucial depth to the first-hand testimonies I've previously recorded in Amman and in Germany, where I spoke with two survivors of the massacre. One of those interviews is already published, the other one will follow shortly. Until relatively recently, the Tantura massacre remained largely unknown outside of Israel. That changed only after a controversial public debate and the release of a powerful documentary in, I believe it was 2022. This documentary brought new global attention to what had been systematically erased. The story of Tantura is not linear. It's complex, it's deeply contested, and it still reverberates today because it's woven into the moral fabric of the ongoing conflict that we see in Gaza and the West Bank. An interview is always too short, so in the limited time we had, we couldn't cover every dimension. So for those wanting a fuller picture, I've published a detailed expose on Substack exploring the Tantura massacre in depth, alongside a separate investigation into the USS Liberty incident, both of which form a broad tapestry of buried truth. You will also hear us reference a number of additional sources during the conversation. All relevant links, interviews, documents are included in the description. This is not just an interview, it's a confrontation with silence, a call to remember, and a challenge to the narratives we have been told. Professor Ilan Pape.
His cadence is crazy.
I really appreciate you spend your time on a Sunday with me.
Thank you, Thomas. It's a pleasure to see you and talk to you about these important issues.
You're too kind. Professor, a couple of things. So for the benefit of our audience, I would like to discuss Tantura today with you for two reasons. First of all, we had the 78th anniversary of Tantura about 2 weeks ago, May 23rd, and your life is, and forgive me if I'm exaggerating, in my point of view, life is deeply interwoven with Tantura, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. Now, today is the 59th anniversary of an incident that less than 1% of the Americans have ever heard about. It's the USS Liberty incident. I will ask you for a moment to explain what it is. I just would like to mention I have published an extensive expose on Substack on this incident. I have interviewed a survivor from that ship. It's also online. And 2 days ago I had published my interview with former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, where we also have discussed the USS Liberty incident. But now, very briefly, Professor Pape, what was or what is the USS Liberty incident?
Yes, the SS Liberty was an intelligence ship belonging to the American Navy, which had all the technology for eavesdropping and intercepting conversations that were in the air that made its way to the Eastern Mediterranean, and as you say, it started working when the war, the June 1960 war, erupted on the 5th of June 1967. 3 days into the war, this particular American Navy that had a very clear American Navy and American national flag waving on its desk, was attacked by the Israeli Air Force, which caused it huge damage and a large number of casualties. So the question people asked was, why did Israel, or why the Israeli Air Force, bombard a ship belonging to its most important ally in the world? And it took time for the Israeli official explanation to come, but when it came, as probably would have been expected, it was claimed that this was done by a mistake, that the ship was not identified, and this was time of war, and it was identified as an enemy warship, which is quite bizarre because, as I said, it was clearly waving the American flag, and it's not very likely that they didn't know what ship they were attacking. So here comes the second question: why did they attack the ship, which they, I think, knew was an intelligence ship, namely that it had all this equipment to listen to something that went on, communication went on between Israeli military forces on the ground. I don't think we'll ever know exactly what was the kind of information that was intercepted that Israel thought was harmful. I have my guess, which is shared by quite a lot of scholars, that they intercepted some atrocities that Israel committed in the Gaza Strip around the 8th of June, whether it was the killing of unarmed Egyptian prisoners of war or attacking some of the population in the Gaza Strip. But it's very difficult to substantiate it as long as, of course, we won't have access to Israeli documentation on that, and I don't think the Israelis would ever allow us such an access. But it's very clear that something that Israel didn't like for the world to know was intercepted by that ship. Given what you do as an historian, you go back to that day and ask what happened on that day that could have been, undermining Israel's self-image, external image. And there were quite a few things that were done there vis-a-vis Egyptian prisoners of war and the local Palestinian population that could have been the cause for that kind of attack on the ship.
Today there is no doubt that the Israelis knew it was an American ship because we have the intercepts between the pilots and the ground control. I have a link to that intercept on my Substack article. The pilot were so baffled they repeatedly asked the ground control, it's an American ship, are you sure, are you sure? And not only that, the ground control set them back again and again and again. So there was an attack that wanted to sink the ship. Yeah? And torpedo boats came, the largest casualty number came from a torpedo. Yeah? But I would like to very briefly run something by you. So there are three potential reasons. One you just mentioned, the other one is Syria, that Israel wanted to go into Syria, and America wouldn't have wanted this. But the most striking theory, I'm not sure even if, let's not talk about semantics, but there is a reason in the background that I found really amazing. Not surprisingly, and we can see this by Netanyahu today, they wanted to drag the US into the war, and that was also true at that time in 1967. Yeah? But at that time, Egypt was supported by the Soviets. So I heard that already. I mean, it's a complex story because the USS Liberty was able to send one distress signal out for a sailor who kind of improvised an antenna to the 6th Fleet. The 6th Fleet already sent help, and they were recalled by McNamara and the President, Lyndon B. Johnson, and the President, knowing that the sailors are being slaughtered. Yeah. But the theory behind it is that Israel wanted to sink the USS Liberty to blame the Egyptians to get. That's also the reason why they wanted to sink the boat, to have no witnesses, yeah, to blame Egypt. And I hear that there already were 2 fighter jets en route in the air to attack Cairo with a nuclear payload. Yeah? So if that is true, and again I have this from several sources, and it's also publicly available information, then we had another incident in the world where we just on hair's breadth avoided a nuclear confrontation between the US and the former Soviet Union. So this is not what I want to say with this is not a small incident. But very quickly, what do you think about this let's say hypothesis that it might have been to blame the Egypts?
I find it not very convincing, I must say, because I studied Israeli documentations and on the eve of the June 67 war and during the first years, we're talking about a very, contrary by the way to popular perception, we're talking about a very confident military and political elite. Remember, this is not anymore the Eshkol government, this is the Moshe Dayan government. They are absolutely confident they can defeat the Arab armies, that they don't need the Americans for that. They are even surprised how easy already by the 8th of June the war was compared to even their own worst case scenarios. They've already totally destroyed the Arab air forces. And they were moving without any real difficulties into any part of the neighboring countries that they wished for. I'm not saying it's not probable, it's probable. As you say rightly, it was not the first time. And the nuclear option is when we thought about the nuclear option in 1973, when it felt that it was about to be defeated. But that was not the mood in June 67. So I cannot see it as a proper kind of consideration. But again, I'm not eliminating. I'm not saying that this is impossible. But I feel that we're still talking about a political and military elite, maybe unlike today, that was not willing for the world to know exactly how atrocious and how many war crimes they committed. They were much more sensitive about international image of Israel than, for example, the present political and military leadership of Israel. They cared about what would be said about the Israeli army and its treatment of prisoners of war of the local population, unlike successive governments after that. So I find the first theory more credible in my eyes, but again, it's not easy. Apart from the fact that you're absolutely right, that they knew exactly what they're attacking. But we're still left with the question of why, I think.
Thank you for that. Now I would like to come back to you. I have a couple of notes next to me. So you are absolutely famous around the world. So first of all, for me it's a privilege to talk to you, but you're also infamous in certain circles, so much so that you were arrested by Homeland Security in 2024. Please tell us.
Yes, I was detained. I was not put in prison. To be accurate, I was not sent to prison. I was detained in the airport for 2.5 hours by the Homeland Security agents when I arrived in Detroit in October 2024, you're right. And I was interrogated for 2.5 hours. My phone was taken, everything on it was copied. I was asked bizarre questions about my political views, and then more concrete questions of who do I know in the United States, especially from the Arab and Muslim community. And eventually I was allowed to go in after the 2.5 hour interrogation. A bizarre anecdote for which I never got the full explanation, although I used some senators I knew and so on to demand an explanation why. Never received an answer. Just a vague idea that it was something to do with national security of the United States. But compared to what other people want.
Was there not also an incident in Germany, or am I mistaken?
No, not with me.
Ah.
Very famous colleagues of mine that should have been treated with respect and dignity were either refused entry into Germany, or in the case of Ali Anonima in Switzerland, were arrested. He was really arrested for 2.5 days. And again, no reason was given, and he was released without any explanation.
No. Now I have 2 or 3 books that I would like to briefly mention. Your books, of course, but to give the viewer of who you are a little bit of context. And please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. You are one of a less than a handful so-called new historians, and that's because in the 1980s or so you had access, you and a couple of colleagues, one of which is Avi Schneim, which I've interviewed, another one is Benny Morris, which I've interviewed. You had access to Israeli States archives, and you started to publish some of the books that we will now discuss. Apparently, the Israeli government did not really appreciate what you gentlemen wrote, and as to my knowledge today, those archives are closed again, also for academic research. So that makes you special as having had, well, for a number of reasons, for having had access to that kind of information. Then you also publish it as Israeli with a very lucid view on the factual historical facts that you discovered. And when we talk about Tantura, we will find out that you also paid a price. But the first book I would like to mention is a book that, maybe it's already out, I thought it's not out, Israel on the Brink, where you talk about the end of the Zionist project. Again, a book where you probably don't make yourself a lot of friends in Israel. What is it about, and when does it come out?
The book will come out in October 2025. It claims that conversation everybody should have, whether people are fearful of such a future or people are happy about such a future. The most important conversation is to, in the long run, is to understand that the state of Israel is not a sustainable project in the long run. By the way, I'm not the only one who says it, but quite a few critics inside Israel itself are warning this is a possible scenario, not that weak in that. But I'm trying to do it as an analyst, not as an activist. Namely, I'm trying in the book to show the processes of disintegration, whether it's a social implosion from within the Israeli Jewish society, a deepening economic crisis, the weaknesses of the army as they were fully exposed on the 7th of October, the growing international isolation of Israel, the fact that so many young Jews in the world don't want to associate themselves with Israel, and maybe the most important fact of all, apart from the Palestinian resistance and resilience, is that not as the world of the Middle East, but as people, as societies. The vast majority of the people would like to see a different kind of political reality in what today is Israel and Palestine. And that counts for something. It counted in the past for something. So I think these are long-term processes, but it's very good to talk about them now, because I think many of them are inevitable. But the question is not always what does integrate, what does collapse. A very important question is what will come instead of it. In a way that if you care about
Frozen.
you would like to see both Arabs and Jews.
Malformed login packet on the alt.
Because we know two things. While the disintegration continues, the Palestinians are the main victims of that process.
Come on, dude.
The brutality of the regime will become even worse if it will feel that it is, sustainable anymore, as happened in the last days of apartheid in South Africa. But the question is, what would happen after that? Will it be followed like in Syria, when Syria disintegrated by a long civil war, as happened also in Libya, in Yemen? Or would we learn something from the processes of decolonizations in the past and try and build something better as soon as possible. It would be a win-win situation for both Palestinians and Jews. This is not a very good time to talk.
I'm gonna leave it there.